Hello and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we'll be talking about a vulnerability chain named PerfektBlue by penetration testing and cyber intelligence firm PCA Cybersecurity. These researchers took a look at a Bluetooth framework developed by OpenSynergy that's commonly used in cars, called BlueSDK, and found a couple of different vulnerabilities that can be performed together to achieve a much larger attack. This is known as vulnerability chaining. Vulnerability chaining is a huge deal because it allows some vulnerabilities that may be low scoring enough that it isn't really on your radar to fix right away, to act as a launching point or a link in the chain for a much more dangerous attack, especially where other more serious vulnerabilities are involved. The attacker needs to be physically near the vehicle and able to pair their device with Bluetooth to execute the attack, of course. The first vulnerability is one that improperly validates L2CAP, which is a protocol in the Bluetooth responsible for Bluetooth being able to use other higher-level protocols than it typically can. It's used for things like improving quality of service or allowing multiple applications to use the same Bluetooth link, so the bandwidth is just being used more efficiently. This vulnerability was only given a 3.5 score, which is considered low. There are two vulnerabilities with the same score of 5.7. The first one of those was where a function in RFCOM, which allows Bluetooth to emulate a serial port connection for pretty simple, reliable data transfer, doesn't terminate properly. And then another one where a parameter in that function, the same one, is incorrectly called. The most serious vulnerability of the stack, however, scores an 8. This vulnerability is known as a use after free vulnerability. This means that a program is trying to use a certain area of memory after that area of memory has been freed. Basically, the memory is no longer assigned to the program and wants to do other things. Since that program isn't supposed to be writing there anymore, it can cause very unexpected things to happen. This vulnerability lies on the audio-video remote control profile and could potentially lead to arbitrary code execution within that environment. And with that, you could potentially find creative ways to access other systems on the vehicle itself. PCA launched a successful attack on a Mercedes-Benz and a Volkswagen during a proof of concept. The proof of concept demonstrates that the researchers were able to get a reverse shell access to the Bluetooth system, and were able to execute commands on it. A reverse shell is a technique commonly used by attackers to gain remote access to a machine they've compromised. The victim is basically made to initiate a connection to the attacker's machine, which is actively listening for this connection. And when it occurs, the attacker has access to a command shell that is running on the victim's machine, and it's able to execute commands on it as if it were their own command shell. At first, many of my sources were speculating that these vulnerabilities could potentially lead to a dangerous amount of access to vehicles, such as access to the horn, which I guess is more annoying, steering controls, parts of the car you would not want a stranger messing with while you're driving on the highway. After all, given what I've just talked about with being able to access your own command shell remotely, it seems like you could potentially do a lot of damage. And, well, this is going to depend a lot on how the Bluetooth is actually implemented. The Hacker News specifically posted an update saying that Volkswagen got back to them on the issue, and that, yes, they know about it, but that the attack couldn't really extend beyond the Bluetooth system. It's still not great. You can potentially use this type of attack for stealing information on the Bluetooth devices that connect to it, but thankfully you can't just take remote control of the vehicle and start driving it yourself or blasting the horn. This doesn't mean that it's true for all models of vehicle impacted, though. Manufacturers may integrate Bluetooth into the wider vehicle system in different ways, and it's going to be those individual differences that matter the most. However, one thing that may put you at ease is that this story is actually rather old news. Sort of. It was almost exactly 1 year ago when these vulnerabilities were initially discovered and being fixed by OpenSynergy, and pretty much every system has a patch available. So why am I talking about this now? Well, PCE Cybersecurity wanted to disclose it to the general public for awareness purposes. After all, how many times have you put off updating the software on your car, or your phone, or your computer? We've all done it. My phone needs a software update right now, and I don't want to do it. By announcing it now, this is a warning to vehicle owners, vendors that integrate the Bluetooth frameworks, and other areas in the automotive supply chain to update as well. Cars are complicated, and so are supply chains when it comes to software. There's a lot of different types of products using this framework as well. Most of them is cars, but there's a couple other devices, too, that also need to be fixed. And for those devices, the impact of this vulnerability could be different. It's easy to just make a public statement disclosing the vulnerability, that it was fixed, and allowing manufacturers to ensure that they are using the latest versions of everything, and not running software that could give you remote access to their whole systems, after all. Thank you to the Hacker News, Cyberscoop, Security Week, and Security Affairs for information on this vulnerability. I thought it was pretty interesting to read about. I always like vulnerabilities as it involves computers we don't really think of as computers, like, cars, elevators, badge readers, all kinds of things. I think it's fascinating that these exist and the ways they can be exploited, even though it's also a little scary how these things can be exploited. Either way, I of course would also like to thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, and until next time, stay secure.